So recently, the Chronicle ran an article about is desegregation dead in San Francisco. And I saw that and kind of wondered, is segregation bad? I know growing up in the South, there are definitely some people who would disagree. And then there are some people that would agree. I was born in the South. I actually am kind of grateful for that at some point in time because I feel like there is this little bubble in the Bay Area that sometimes we forget what the world is like outside of San Francisco. And I spent all my summers there, and I remember visiting my grandmother, and her block was pretty much African-American, Black people, and then there was another block that I look back now, I never walked down that block. Nobody told me not to walk down that block. But I knew that that was pretty much where the white people lived because actually their street was paved and it looked a little bit better than ours and they were better kept. And then I had a friend who lived on the other side of the field and her house was really nice and her family, I always felt like they had a little bit more than my grandmother did. And they actually had the one house that Black people lived on that street. And I remember going to her house because her grandmother had a beauty salon in the basement because she couldn't really rent a space in downtown Denison where I was from. So again, this idea of Jim Crow, even though by that time there were no more signs, but everybody kind of knew where you were supposed to go and where you were supposed to be. And I remember thinking, this is really cool that they have this beauty salon in here, right? That's really awesome. It wouldn't be till years later that I would really understand it, but that was the mindset of folks, right? Like we're not going to wait for somebody to give us something. We're going to make that happen. My parents knew Jim Crow very well, and because of that, they gave that same kind of push and determination. You need to work a little bit harder. You can't wait for somebody to fix it for you. You've got to figure it out. You've got to make it happen. Well, my mother had me at a time when it wasn't really good for a young woman to be a single parent. We ended up moving from Texas to the Bay Area. I was a product of busing, didn't realize it at the time. I just remember being on the bus with all the other children of color, and the bus driver, who I thought was amazing, coming from Texas, was African-American and had blonde hair. I had never seen such a thing. And I just remember getting on the bus every morning and her saying to me, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" I thought that was the funniest thing. So I get on the bus and ride, and we were going from the Flatlands to the Berkeley Hills, and I thought it was amazing, had the best time ever. The few things that I remember about that. One is being able to run around on the playground asphalt with no shoes on, which I guess is typical Berkeley, and busting my toe wide open. And I remember in kindergarten coming home telling my mother, "You spelled my name wrong. My teacher said Sheryl is spelled with a C, not with an S." And of course, my mother did not take kindly to that. But I look back on it and I wonder if the teacher would have said to someone named Amy who spelled it I-E or Amy with a Y, if she would have said to them, "You spelled your name wrong." I wonder if it was that whole part of integration where she just thought my mother was African-American and couldn't really figure out how to spell Sheryl. We would move, and then I would go to unincorporated Pinole and go to school. We were the only African-American family that lived on the little cul-de-sac there. And I must have learned this song in school. And I remember being outside playing one day, and I was having the best time ever. Mind you, we're the only Black people in the neighborhood. There was only 2 African-American people in my class. And I was outside, I was singing at the top of my lungs, and my mom was in the house. And she came running out and she said, "Do not sing that song out here. What are you thinking?" And that again was my first kind of entree into, we need to be aware of who we are and where we come from and what that represents and how people take that. I had learned this song in school, and I was outside in this unincorporated part of Pinole where we were the only Black people living. And I was out there singing, "Oh, Mandy, pick a bale of cotton. Oh, Mandy, pick a bale a day. Oh, me and my Mandy can pick a bale of cotton." I was just yelling it and running around, and my mother was like, "What are you thinking? What are you thinking?" Coming from the segregated South, she couldn't imagine that I had gotten so far gone that I had forgotten really what I represented and that I would maybe be perpetuating some myth in someone's head. And my grandmother worked in a cotton mill. She used to come home all the time with cotton in her hair, and so I hadn't really thought about it. But that was kind of the first entrance into that for me. And then we moved to Oakland, and that would be my first time going to an predominantly African-American school. And I remember walking in there, and it wasn't about it being mostly Black. It was about the different way that people seem to think and feel about education. I remember coming in and just not really sensing very positive energy. I remember coming in thinking like, this isn't a happy place. And, you know, the first girl that I encountered said to me, now be careful, don't go to the principal's office because he does things to girls. And I was like, what? Like that was foreign to me. I would then go on to middle school in West Oakland, and when I was in Berkeley schools, I had been put into GATE classes, gifted and talented education. And this class was GATE and honors. And the teacher started off the first day and she said, it's predominantly African-American class. The teacher was African-American. And she said, so class, we have 2 students in here who have been officially tested to be GATE students, which means that they passed the test and they're supposed to be smarter. So we will spend the whole school year calling them dummy number 1 and dummy number 2. And instead of the education piece being embraced and being supported, we were in this classroom where the teacher was actually making fun of people for doing well. And so that was kind of my, like, this is segregation. I never told my mother till the end of the year, and she couldn't believe that I hadn't said anything. So I end up being an educator and then working in the Fillmore, right? And education becomes this really important thing for me. It becomes this, like, I want to make sure that people have positive experiences. I want to make sure that people understand the history of where we came from. People fought for the right for us to be educated. 1839, African Americans, it was banned. You couldn't teach them to read or write. If you did get taught doing that, you could be prosecuted. But 1865, after emancipation, it changes. Within 2 years, these colleges are popping up. Like, people want to learn. They're demanding it. They're not waiting for the government. 1870, when Georgia tries to begin implementing public schools, they go into the African-American communities. They've already started it. It's already happening. They wanted it. They weren't waiting for somebody to come in. They knew, even though they didn't have it, they started looking at how they could raise money. They started making it happen. That was important. That was the fight for education. That was the fight that I felt like I had to do, because it wasn't, anywhere I went, I always felt like it wasn't quite right. Now, when I was at home in the South, they were like, look, you better work hard. You got to work harder. You deserve this. We're going to make this happen. So we come here today and I'm kind of like, what happened to the fight? Desegregation happens and we think that everything's all good, and we start to believe that myth that everything's perfect and we don't have to work harder anymore. We don't have to make it happen. If it's not working, we just don't worry about it. You know, my son loves comedians, so he has always got like something on. So he had Chris Rock on, and Chris Rock was talking about where he lives in Alpine, New Jersey. Hundreds of people, only 4 Black people. It's Chris Rock, Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige, and Eddie Murphy. Those are the 4 Black people that live in this community, right? He's like, do you know what the guy next door to me does? He's a dentist. Not sure, not going to win an award, not going to be like in the Hall of Fame for pulling teeth. Like, he's a dentist. Yet, the only Black people that can live in that community have to be like the best in their field. So he goes on, and at the end of it, he says, the Black man has to fly in order to get what the white man can walk to. And so I'm not promoting or saying that we have to have segregation. I am saying that we have to be real with our kids and with our community about what it takes to make it happen. Segregation still exists today. Like I said, there was just the article in the Chronicle that was talking about San Francisco public schools are actually worse off than they've been in decades. 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. says, look, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. 2015 Lifeway Research does a polling analysis and finds that 66% of Americans have never been a minority during the church service. They've never been a minority during that worship hour. So Charles Drew, 70% African American, 93% poor, and still struggling even though they're getting extra support. I'm like, let's walk in some truth here. I'm not promoting segregation, but I am saying that there are some things that can be learned from that, right? Harlem Children's Zone in New York, they predominantly African American. They have less than 10% dropout rate. They have 100% of their students pass the English exit exam, right? 96% of them pass the overall exam to graduate high school, and then 90% of them pass the math exam. Glenville, Ohio, a man says, I'm going to start a public academy for African American boys. 0% dropout rate. Glenville City, 54% dropout rate. So he's doing something right. Something that is happening there is making the difference. So I'm not saying we all need to go and segregate schools, but we do need to look at things like Harlem Children's Zone and Glenville, where we have the Gen Academy, and see what it is that they're doing that's making a difference that we can't figure out right here. So my dedication and my commitment has been exposure and education and encouragement, right? And saying, like, it's going to be hard and you're going to have to work hard to do that, but we're going to support you to do that. And so my challenge is for us to not continue to live in this bubble and be like, there's nothing wrong. We live in San Francisco. Everybody has access. There is something wrong. If in the schools that are predominantly African American or predominantly poor, they're not getting the support that they need. And so my challenge is maybe it's going to visit a school. Maybe it's just saying to someone, you can do it. I believe in you, right? My thing, and everybody that knows me knows, there are three things that I say. It's exposure, education, expectation. Greater expectations, greater hopes can help change what is going on in our community. So I invite you to expect more from the youth of today.